Well, hi, this is Bishop Rick Stika of the Diocese of Knoxville, and I always enjoy being able to have the opportunity to speak to you, my sisters and brothers of the Diocese of Knoxville, the Catholic Church that covers all of East Tennessee. And I've done this in a variety of ways concerning a variety of different situations that face us as a church and as a society. And I do that today as I discuss with you the actions and measures and maybe some suggestions that I make in terms of this recent outbreak of this very horrific virus. You know, when I was still in St. Louis, there was a story about World War II. And there was a particular church called St. Alphonsus Liguori, also known as the Rock Church, on North Grand Avenue. It was a place where families would come who would pray before the image of the Blessed Mother for members of their family who were in battle in the Atlantic as well in the Pacific Theater. So many Catholics and non-Catholics traveled to that church that in the 1940s, the main type of transportation was the streetcars. That the city of St. Louis actually added additional streetcars because of the large amount of people that were traveling to that church, which still exists today, in order to pray. World War II sometimes defines as the greatest generation that traveled to Europe and to the Pacific Theater. Well, I actually think that this moment in our history of the nation, 2020, who would have thought just months ago that this time and this era will define who we are as Americans as well as Catholics, but also people of all faith communities. The scriptures remind us to care for one another. And that has been my primary aim as I have issued some directives and in some cases some mandates in terms of dealing with the Catholic community. Because after all, we belong to also a greater community, the community that surrounds us in East Tennessee. Much of this is given to me as advice from the Center for Disease Control, but also listening to the different governmental agencies and entities that exist that are ratcheting up efforts in order to provide the opportunity to deal with this virus, because they say the ultimate is to level it off so that if it continues to grow, that the health system will be able to deal with it. My first directive was to limit the way that the Eucharist is celebrated. First of all, by avoiding the handshaking or the expression of the gesture of peace at our Masses. I said to look at each other and just bow and smile. And people did that. Another recommendation also was to not hold hands, which seems to be our tradition in East Tennessee during the Our Father. Again, to limit that. And finally, one that was a little bit more difficult for some people was to limit the reception of the Eucharist from receiving on the tongue to receiving in the hand. You know, for the first 4 centuries of our Catholic existence, people did receive the Eucharist in the hand. In fact, one of the great saints said that if you receive communion in the hand, it's like you put your hand out like a throne to receive the King, to receive Jesus. And I thought those were sufficient at the moment. But as this virus continues to grow and expand in terms of geography in the United States, and again, listening to the medical experts, both at the Center for Disease Control and also local people that I have spoken to, I joined with bishops throughout the United States in limiting the access to the celebration of Mass. Actually, what that means is no public sacraments will be celebrated in terms of the Eucharist. Now, Mass will continue to be celebrated every day by the priests, but that would be limited to just them. The churches will remain open. Hopefully, the churches that close sometimes after Mass in the morning will stay open. In fact, not hopefully, but I've asked all parishes to do just that. And to expose the Blessed Sacrament in terms of the monstrance. Now, normal liturgical law says that there should always be somebody in the church when the Eucharist is exposed in the monstrance. But I'm waiving that in order for people to come in and spend some time with Jesus. Also, there are a number of parishes that offer Mass on TV via their website, video Masses. The Cathedral does, All Saints also does this, and other parishes throughout the diocese. And what I ask you to do is to check our diocesan website, dioknox.org, to see what churches do that. Also, places like EWTN televise Mass throughout the day, the University of Notre Dame. And probably if you do a Google search, you can find that happening throughout the United States and the world. Even the Pope's Mass, which is closed to the public, is televised from the Vatican. I will review this every couple weeks, listening to the information, again, gained by the Center of Disease Control, to see if I can lift any of these restrictions. But please note, we're closing in on Palm Sunday and Holy Week and the celebration of Easter, the beautiful celebration of the Chrism Mass that is so wonderfully celebrated in this diocese, the Tuesday of Holy Week. These too might be affected. We'll just play it by ear and listen to the experts. Flexibility is very important. This also might influence the sacrament of confirmation, again, where people come together in large crowds. So as of now, I am postponing all confirmations until at least the beginning of April, just again to weigh what the medical advice is telling us. So I've asked all pastors to see if two things. One, if we can combine with next year confirmations, or I'd be more than willing to reschedule for the fall. The same thing with parish meetings and diocesan meetings. They're all canceled until further notice. You know, our hope is, depends on who you speak with, that at some point this is going to level out and maybe even get to a place that it is manageable. I know the government today announced that they're working on a vaccine, and it's in test trials now. And also they're working on, a test that you can take to see if you have the virus. But even please note with that, if you receive that test, it doesn't mean that you don't have the virus. The virus has to kind of percolate in your system. And if it's not at that level where it can be noticed by these tests, it might surface in a day or two, or it doesn't mean if you take the test that you can't get it 2 weeks later. And so that's why the government and myself as a bishop and bishops throughout the United States and church leaders and everybody else is saying we're just going to have to roll with this until we know that it is something that can be managed. A lot of the younger folks might have the virus contained within their system, but their immune system is strong enough that they are able to fight it, and in some cases may never know it because it just might be mild symptoms. But it doesn't mean that they are not a carrier. And they can go to another person who has a compromised immune system, like myself. I've been diabetic for 41 years, type 1, and I have heart disease. I look healthy for the most part, but that can attack my immune system. And I live with Cardinal Regali, who soon will be 85. And so if you're a younger person, and younger people sometimes think they are invincible, you might be at a moment in terms of the virus, but it doesn't mean you're not communicating it to another because it might be possessed in you. Just words to the wise. And so, as I said, all public masses are canceled until further notice. The priest will continue to celebrate the Eucharist privately. And also in my life, one of the privileges that most bishops have is to have your own chapel in your house, since you're usually not living in a parish community. And so I am going to expose the Eucharist in my private chapel and use my iPad and FaceTime to be able to allow you to pray before the Blessed Sacrament at home. I plan to do this, if I can, 24 hours a day. Also on March 19th, the last day the public Mass is celebrated, we celebrate the solemnity of St. Joseph, the husband of Mary. St. Joseph is the patron of the universal church, and he's also the patron of a variety of things. He's also the patron of a happy death, but we're going to ignore that for right now, huh? Let's focus on St. Joseph protecting the church. He was chosen by God to protect the Blessed Mother and to protect Jesus. And it also happens to be my 11th anniversary, so I thank you for all your prayers for me. I'm also going to consecrate or dedicate the Diocese of Knoxville under the protection of the same person who was chosen by God to protect Mary and Jesus. Now, some people might think all these different things we do in terms of our prayer life are magical. Faith is not magical. Faith is communication with God. If you're a non-believer, you probably can't understand that. But throughout the history of the world, it has been the Catholic Church and other faith communities after the Reformation. It has been this seed of Christianity brought to us by the birth, the life, and the death of Jesus that has given us great hope. Finally, the people that are most vulnerable, they say, to this, but it's not always the case, but are those, as I said earlier, about who are senior citizens, whatever that is. I heard this beautiful story. There was a woman at a local grocery store, wherever her community was. She was getting ready to go into a store, and all of a sudden she heard somebody knocking on a car window. And the car window was open like this. And as she looked in, there was an elderly couple sitting there. And the elderly woman who was sitting on the passenger side had a note. She plastered it up against the window. And the woman read it. And it said, "We are senior citizens. And we are terrified to go into the grocery store. Would you help us?" She had a grocery list. She had some money. And she asked this woman, "Would you help us?" And the woman said yes. And so the woman sitting in the car passed the grocery list through the window and also some cash. And so the woman received it, went way out of her way, went into the grocery store, bought all the ingredients on that grocery list, brought it back, put it in the trunk, gave the woman her change, and then went back in to shop for herself. I don't know if that woman was Catholic, Christian, or even a believer. But I know that woman was a person who understood and understands humanity. This will be our great test. And so in the next days, I'm going to offer some slight messages, again, stories and recommendations, but this is the first then. Check on your elderly neighbors, family members. You don't necessarily have to visit them in person, but if they're in a nursing home and they're in a house, try to call them every day. See how they're doing. And also if you know of a neighbor who is terrified or who has limitations, of going outside, how about this? Call them up and say, "I'm willing to go shopping for you. Just give me your list and, of course, give me some cash. And I'll do what I can for you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to check up on you." That's how we live faith. And that's how we live our humanity. Finally, to close, I have a prayer that I'm going to read. It's a prayer that we sent out to the diocese. It's kind of dovetails with a prayer that Pope Francis issued from the Holy See. By the way, did you see, and maybe you didn't see, but there was some video that the Pope himself wanted to make a pilgrimage from the Vatican to a church that contained within that church a crucifix that many centuries ago, when a plague attacked the city of Rome, that crucifix was paraded, was carried throughout the city of Rome, invoking the protection of God. So on a Sunday afternoon, when the streets of Rome were quiet, an elderly man of the age of 83 limped along because he's got a bad hip or bad knees, and he made a personal pilgrimage to this church to pray for the people of God. in the city of Rome, because after all, he is also the Bishop of Rome. Prayer. If you can't attend Mass, read the Scriptures, say the Rosary, watch it on TV, pray devotions that are close to you, but pray that this virus might be eradicated, that the vaccines might be developed quickly, as well as the testing. So this prayer is devoted to the Immaculate Mary. You know, she is the patroness of our diocese, for we were created on September 8th, which is celebrated as the birth of Mary in 1988. Also on our website, we're going to post a variety of prayers so that you might pray them as a family. O Immaculate Mary, patroness of the Diocese of Knoxville, the Catholic Church of East Tennessee, but we also pray for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. You always shine on our path as a sign of salvation and of hope. We entrust ourselves to you, health of the sick, who at the cross took part in the pain of Jesus along with St. John, keeping firm your faith. And because Jesus entrusted you to us as our mother, we are sure that you will provide so that, as in Cana of Galilee, we may return to joy and to feasting after this time of trial. Help us, O Mother of divine love, to comfort and to conform to the will of the Father, and to do as we are told by Jesus, who has taken upon himself all of our sufferings and carried our sorrows to lead us through the cross of this our present time to the joy of the resurrection. Amen. And under your protection we seek refuge, O Holy Mother of God. Do not disdain the prayers of we who are involved in trial and distress, but deliver us from every danger, O glorious and blessed Virgin. I forgot one last thing. Pray for those involved in the health community, the nurses and the doctors, and all the people who keep the hospitals clean, those involved in developing the vaccines, and those who devote their lives to care for others. Let me tell you, they're going to be awful exhausted. If you think you're tired of hearing about this, that's now their world to help you. You know, finally, Franklin Roosevelt, during World War II, no, it was actually during the Depression, said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I believe in that, but I want to add something to that. The only thing that we have to fear is fear itself and people who lack common sense. Let's use our common sense. Wash your hands. Use that disinfectant. Stay away from big crowds. Not only to protect yourself, but also to protect those most vulnerable. God bless you and stay safe.